Hello, everybody, and welcome. This is the fourth Giving the Devil His Due audiobook panel, which is part of a series of live stream panel sessions with audiobook narrators, authors, producers, and editors, which we are holding for the launch of the audiobook edition of our charity anthology, the Shirley Jackson Award-nominated Giving the Devil His Due. My name is Anusha Kandasivam. I'm your moderator for this session. Our charity anthology, Giving the Devil His Due, is part of our Read for Pixels program, through which we work with award-winning and best-selling authors to raise awareness and funds for our work to end violence against women and girls. The charity anthology was initially launched in paperback and ebook editions from our publishing partner Running Wild Press on 1st September last year. Now, just over a year later, we are absolutely thrilled to release the audiobook edition, which was produced in partnership with VoiceWorks Audio and many of the finest audiobook narrators in the business. Today's YouTube session is also our 14th Read for Pixels livestream author panel. The Pixel Project created these panel sessions to be an accessible resource for writers interested in approaching themes such as misogyny, sexism, gender, and violence against women with depth, empathy, and accuracy in their stories. And so what better topic than Rage Against the Patriarchy, the power of audiobooks to give victims a voice in the system. Now, here to participate in this discussion are four of the key people who are an invaluable part of our anthology. Here we go. Hi, everybody. Okay, so I'm going to start with Dana Cameron. So Dana writes science fiction, fantasy, horror, noir, historical fiction, thriller, traditional mystery, and she draws from her expertise in archaeology for all of it. Her work has won multiple Agatha, Anthony, and McAfee Awards and earned an Edgar Award nomination. The Emma Fielding mysteries were optioned by Muse Entertainment. Sight Unseen debuted in 2019 on the Hallmark Movies and Mysteries channel, so you might have seen it. Dana's story in the Giving the Devil His Due anthology is called The Kindly Sea. And we have Alyssa Bresnahan, who is on that side. Alyssa is a stage and film actress and audiobook narrator living in New York City. And she has been seen on Broadway in Network and Warhorse, and off-Broadway in Napoli, Brooklyn, Hamlet, and Measure for Measure. Her film credits include Solace Point, The Mountain, 27 Dresses, and The Wrestler. Alyssa is a long-time audiobook narrator, a multiple Earphone Award winner, an Audio Award nominee, and was named an Audiophile Golden Voice. Alyssa is the narrator for The Kindly Sea and also The Little Thing by Christina Henry in the anthology. And just below me, we have Jason Sanford. Jason is a two-time finalist for the Nebula Award who has published dozens of stories in Asimov's science fiction, Interzone, Apex Magazine, among numerous others. His first novel, Fake Birds, was recently published last year. Jason was born and raised in the American South, and his previous experience includes work as an archaeologist and as a Peace Corps volunteer. Jason's story in the anthology is As We Stand and Pray. And next to me, we have Erin Moon, who is a classically trained professional AACAA SAG-AFTRA actress and dual citizen of the US and Canada. She is an award-winning narrator who started her career in audiobooks as a director, over 200 books, and editor, another 300 books at least, between theater gigs and New York City in 2005. She has been narrating, directing, and coaching exclusively since 2009. Erin has narrated more than 400 novels for major publishing and audiobook production houses, including Penguin Random House, Simon & Schuster, Backstone, and VoiceWorks Audio. Erin is the narrator of Jason's story, As We Stand and Pray. Okay. So now you guys, the audience, you can participate. You will also be able to ask the panel questions. Just make sure you're logged onto your YouTube account so that you can type your questions in the chat box that's on the right-hand side of the YouTube screen. And Regina, who is today's producer and chat box moderator, will relay the questions to me. I will read them out to the panel to answer. And for those of you who are interested in getting your very own copy of Giving the Devil His Due, you can order the audiobook, the ebook, or the paperback edition from major booksellers worldwide. There's Amazon, Kobo, Google Play, Apple Books, and so much more. All net proceeds go towards keeping the Pixel Project's campaigns, programs, and initiatives such as this one alive and kicking. Okay, so before we begin the panel discussion, both Alyssa and Erin have very graciously agreed to do some short readings to get the session started. So Alyssa will read an excerpt from The Kindly Sea by Dana Cameron, and Erin will read from As We Stand and Pray by Jason. So I think Alyssa will start first.
Okay,
So
thank
take
you.
it away, Alyssa.
Thank you.
I'll put you on screen.
It wasn't nearly as dark beneath the waves as Lucy expected. She was no longer angry or afraid, just tired. She saw the lights, glittering, neon jewels suspended in a sinuous and glassy body. Kindly alien eyes regarded her, and sucker-covered arms waved gently, hovering in the water. Lucy realized that the sea had taken the form of this creature to speak with her. The sea asked Lucy, "How did this come to pass?" Lucy thought of the steady, sly progression, the chummy nudges on the shoulder, eventually turning to little squeezes of encouragement, the odd hug of excitement. Nothing overt or obvious, just enough to normalize his proximity. As she reached for a book, his hand grazed the side of her breast. He apologized, horrified and embarrassed. At their first official meeting, she arrived at his office to hear the sound of urination. He'd left the door to the bathroom off his office open. He said nothing about it. The next week, she arrived 5 minutes later and found the same situation. She considered saying something, but was stopped by her need for a job, one that could only come after he'd signed off on her dissertation. Only a few more weeks, maybe 2 months, and she'd be well away from him. She could do that. He was of another generation, friendly and awkward, after all. She might have been misinterpreting it all. The next meeting, however, he slid his hand over her breast, looking her straight in the eyes. She left hastily, lodged a formal complaint. Later, she went to the party to try and reclaim some of her day, herself. "I wasn't even supposed to be here," she explained to the sea. "My dissertation lead was killed in an accident before she could give me her notes. The university decided I needed one more senior scholar in addition to my other readers, and he was it." A thought struck her, filling her with dread. "I didn't try. I mean, it was an accident. I didn't jump to... Am I dead?" "No, you are not dead," the sea answered, "and you did not try to destroy yourself. We would not have allowed that. But you are at a turning point, and we, who are everywhere, observe." The words should have worried her, but Lucy was too entranced by the elegance of the sea, too reassured by its empathetic manner. "What do you want?" Lucy felt the ancient intelligence of the sea and knew this question somehow mattered. It was not to be answered frivolously. She thought of the doubt she felt, the humiliation of being frozen in a moment, the way her adult self had abandoned her to panic in her encounters with him, the feeling of violation and of self-recrimination for not having stopped it. After a long heartbeat, then two, she answered, "I want him to feel what I felt, to know what it feels like." "It is done." The sea handed her a small shell, a token of their promise. Lucy took it without thinking. "Like that? How will I know?" "You are the author of this wish. You will see it work." With a gesture that was either farewell or a dismissal, the sea turned and scuttled along the sandy bottom, its translucent arms and bulbous mantle vanishing instantly into the black. "Thank you." Knowing that she no longer had any use for breath, Lucy took a last deep breath, filling her lungs with water, and saw no more.
Hey. Thank you, Alyssa. That was
Well done.
amazing. Yeah, so cool and creepy. Okay, so before we move on, we'll go to Erin to do your reading of Jason's story. So I'll put you on screen, Erin.
Thank you. I walked up the steps to the church and tapped the white-painted wood for luck before opening the front door. I passed the pews I'd sat on for so many years, past the altar I'd prayed before. I knocked on Brother Walker's office door. "Anna," he yelled. He sat at his desk, working on his sermon for tonight's revival. I remembered helping him with his sermons in this very office when I was a teenager, and how one summer day, when I was only 15, he closed this office door and kissed me. Then he pushed me to the floor, and I took a deep breath, trying not to again remember that awful day. Brother Walker hadn't changed in the last 5 years. Even though he was now over 70, he was still a tall man and towered over the desk. The rolled-up sleeves of his plaid shirt showed off large muscles. "Hello, Seffi," he said. "Interesting that you're here. Sid was on guard last night, right? Guess you can't trust a vampire who hates killing." I tried to say something, but the words gagged in my mind. It took all my willpower to keep myself standing in the doorway, to keep from fleeing this evil man. "Did you want something?" he asked impatiently. "If you're thinking about getting back at me, all I have to do is ring the bells and every monster around will rush to help me. Not that I need help dealing with someone like you." I glanced at the remote control for the church bells, which sat on his desk next to the draft of his sermon. The first time he'd let me activate the bells had been one of the best days of my life, even better than when he rescued me or baptized me. "It's revival," I whispered, angry that I again felt like a scared kid before him. "What?" "Today's the church revival. You always preached that any monster could come here on this day and seek forgiveness." Brother Walker stood up and stepped around the desk. I gripped the door jamb tight, trying not to run back out the front door of the church. He noticed this and laughed softly. "Yeah," he said, "that's true. But are you really seeking forgiveness? I think this is just you trying to trick me." He stepped closer. I felt so afraid that my eyes reached out to him before I could stop myself. But as before, I felt only a blank wall within him. The wall was a little fuzzier than I remember, as if I'd grown stronger. I could almost see into his secrets, but it still wasn't enough. Even after all he'd done in all these years, my powers couldn't reach into him like everyone else. "You told some cruel lies about me," he said. "Told people I'd done things." "They weren't lies," I snapped, desperate to remain calm. "Maybe, but I'll still give you a chance to redeem yourself. You be at that tent when we start the revival. If you confess that everything you accused me of was a lie, I won't have you killed." I nodded. Brother Walker turned back to his desk. "I have a sermon to finish. Get out." I walked slowly out of the church, forcing myself not to give him the pleasure of seeing me flee. But once I was outside, I ran as fast as I could.
Thank you so much, Erin. That was also very creepy in a different way. All right, so let's get on to discussion. Actually, I'm going to give everybody an introduction so that we have some context for our discussion. Now, okay, here we go. Now, violence against women is so persuasive as to be present in our institutions, as we saw in academia, in religious organizations, in sports, and more, as well as institutionalized into our legal systems and social structures. It is perpetuated and perpetrated by religious and cultural beliefs that validate violence against women, weak legislation, and dysfunctional criminal justice systems. As with most other forms of violence against women, institutionalized and systemic violence against women has, especially in recent times, been featured and become a point of discussion in speculative fiction, where themes of ingrained and generational misogyny can be addressed creatively and effectively. These themes are certainly present in the stories in Giving Devil His Due, and institutional and institutionalized violence against women is front and center in the stories written by the two authors on our panel today. The victims and survivors in these stories receive justice, albeit by eldritch means, but the machinery of established institutions is such that there is rarely justice for victims in real life. With that in mind, today's panel will discuss how audiobooks and audiobook narrators can break the silence around gender-based violence to give victims a voice while advancing the conversation about institutionalized violence against women by amplifying the impact of speculative fiction that tackles this issue, and what audio storytelling can do to address harmful systems and institutions that perpetrate violence against women. So, the Pixel Project created Giving the Devil His Due to harness the power of speculative fiction and storytelling to counteract the many toxic narratives about violence against women in pop culture that are driven by sexism, misogyny, and toxic masculinity. Each story in the book, including Dana's and Jason's, confronts the issue of violence against women and invites readers to imagine a world where violent and misogynistic men get their comeuppance for abusing women and girls, Twilight Zone style. So my first question is for the authors, Dana and Jason. Thank you so much, first of all, for writing your respective stories, The Kindly See and As We Stand and Pray. What are your thoughts about having an audiobook edition of the anthology, including the amazing readings of your story by Alyssa and Erin? Let's go to Dana first.
For me, it's another way to reach people to talk about this subject. I think people consume media in different ways, and I really appreciate having a different medium to reach other readers who might need to hear that they're not alone in these particular experiences. I think it for folks who might enjoy listening to an audiobook in addition to reading it, it embodies it gives another dimension to the story to hear the anxiousness or the fear, the anger in a voice, and I think that it elevates the emotion.
Definitely. Jason?
No, I agree. Stories flow across different mediums and platforms, and reach different people in different ways. I have family members who will never read a story in a book, but they'll listen to a podcast,
Mhm.
audiobook fiction, and all of that. And it's different ways to reach different people. And each medium is slightly different. So and hearing the voices in an audiobook narration, it's just a whole different experience to the story, and it can reach people in such a unique way that the written word sometimes can't. Doesn't every storytelling form has its pros and cons, and I think the audiobook and narrating of stories has a special power. That's one reason you see so many podcasts these days that are focused on telling stories of victims and injustices, and you go, why are so many of these podcasts breaking these days? Well, it's not like we suddenly have it's suddenly injustices and wrongdoing being uncovered. It's just it's a new way and a new power that those podcasts have to reach people, and I see the same with audiobooks and narrations of fiction. So it's a great thing.
Yep, great. So, Elise and Erin, thank you so much for donating your time and amazing talent to record these two stories for the audiobook. Both of you are among the best narrators in the audiobook business with your choice of projects. Why did you decide to join the cast of our anthology despite knowing that the issue of violence against women is a difficult one? Let's go to Erin first.
Well, for me, if I have the opportunity to, exactly what the two authors have said, give voice to a hard story, it has a great weight for me. Because I know that even though it will be difficult to go through that, stories are written, they're not written about the mundane. They're written about the greatest, hardest, most thoroughly heavy times of our existence and the biggest struggles of our life. And so my whole career, being a person who's been involved in story my entire life, has fundamentally been about, voicing and embodying the hardest parts of people's lives. And if I can do something like this, where not only is it what I normally do in my life, which is embody the hardest parts of people's lives, or the biggest, because it can also be the greatest parts of people's lives, and often is, but something that it can actually go toward creating discussion and being the voice for so many people that I've known in my own life as well, who have gone through so many of these things. It's a privilege to be able to be, the auntie to these stories, the one who passes the story from one medium to another or to another group of people. So for me, it's a no-brainer. I'm going to jump in both feet.
Cool. Alyssa?
Yes, I would echo everything that Erin had said so beautifully. I mean, I was asked and felt honored to be a part of this, so that was the main entry. And similarly, things that are difficult often have great meaning and purpose, and that is what I too have devoted my life's work to, whether it's on books or theater or film, to tell those stories. Those are move people, move me, and to understanding.
Right, cool. That's great answers. Okay, so Giving the Devil His Due is inspired by the original Twilight Zone, through which the legendary Rod Serling used speculative fiction to critique systems that perpetuate social issues ranging from sexism to fascism. However, it seems that only in the last decade or two that pop culture has really started including stories that address institutionalized misogyny that perpetuates violence against women in our societies. In light of this, let's talk about the power and potential of audiobooks to give victims a voice and to critique the systems and institutions that uphold sexism, misogyny, and violence against women. So, this is a question for everybody. Activists and advocates often refer to this wall of silence where systems, institutions, and culture keep victims of violence against women from speaking up. How can audiobooks help break this silence to give victims a voice? We go to Erin first.
I think what Jason said really resonates with me is the opportunity to have the experience be lived, to be lifted from the page. So when we read, I feel like that's a very I'm having my own individual experience. I'm having my individual experience that's wrought from my own life and my own imagination, and I'm doing my own world building and situation building and putting myself in those shoes. And then as a listener, I'm immediately in relationship with somebody. So I'm in relationship with the narrator. And so it's a different responsibility, essentially, that I end up feeling, because I know that there's a person on the other end of that immediately. Like, there's no question. I mean, I know there is when I'm reading the page. I know there's a person on the other end of it because I'm usually in awe of the talent. But when I'm in, it's almost like I'm in conversation, but I just am choosing the position of being a listener. And so my emotional responsibility to the person who's telling their story to me is heightened, much as though I was sitting across the table or at a campfire with a dear friend and I just gave them the floor. My emotional, my empathy is very engaged as soon as there's a voice there. So I think for me, that's one of the things that it does do, is that emotionality is, you can't escape it. There's no question about it. It is there.
Yeah.
That's very powerful. Yeah. Okay. Alyssa, what do you think?
Yes. Well, once again, I'm beautifully placed behind you, Erin.
We'll have to switch it up. We'll switch it up a bunch.
I mean, I think also to add to that tone, the tone of telling a story is very listenable, because you're not, you can't yell. No matter what kind of energy is going on, there still needs to be a cadence that is communicative, so that our first job is to allow people to hear, and so that already opens a door. And then I think the power of a narrator is that it's almost like the adult in the room. That is the objective eye, and so the story and the chaos and the pain or the comedy or whatever it is going on, but the role of the narrator is always there as a kind of a guide to everyone, the storyteller and the listener, and that I think it kind of naturally makes a safe space that is ancient, and so kind of basic human communication.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Dana.
Sort of playing off what Alicia was saying, there's that storytelling aspect, the idea of voicing a situation. But I think particularly with genre fiction, and particularly with horror or dark fantasy or any kind of speculative fiction, there is the ability to talk about really complicated, painful things at one step removed, because it's easier to talk about systematic racism, systematic sexism, or institutionalized abuse of, in either of those situations, if there's a story that you can pay attention to, and then say, okay, this is a place for me to have this adventure, to have this tale, to bear witness to it. But also, it gives me a space to think about it and say, oh, have I been in this? Has someone I known been in this place? Have I been a part of this and not understood it? It's when I notice that a lot of friends who are my age or younger, watching Buffy the Vampire Slayer for the first time with their kids, and realizing that there are bigger subjects than just vampires and slayers. There's all things about going through high school and young love and abuse and all kinds of things. And it gave them a way to talk about those things. That gave the kids a way to talk about things that they might not want to have spoken about with their parents in a much more bald way. And that is the thing that really makes me want to write genre fiction, because if you're talking about dark fantasy, it's about the what if. How are we dealing with the other? If we're talking about mystery, it's like, what's the difference between what's legal and what's just? Any genre, you can take that and say, okay, this is what we're really talking about in the midst of this engaging with Hope's story. And so that is sort of it's an addition to that being spoken, but also talking about the genre. I think it really makes a big difference. Science fiction, for example, is all about what if, and if you're talking about aliens, it makes it a whole lot easier to talk about them and the situation than to talk about the thing that you might have encountered that day. And I think that's really powerful.
Jason?
You know, right before this, we were talking briefly about archaeology. You know, I love the written language. I love writing stories. But if we go back into the history of humanity, written language is maybe 5,000 years old, maybe 6,000 at most, at least based on current evidence. The spoken language goes back at least 100,000 years, possibly a great deal more. There is some controversy on that. I personally lean into a great deal more on the side of the debate. So, you know, hearing stories shared, spoken, I think resonates with people in a very deep way. And it's a powerful thing, you know. So, you know, if you know, and again, like we were talking earlier, you know, different mediums can hit people in different ways. Well, a spoken story, of a story being told by voice, which is how stories were told through literally time immemorial, immortal, in human history, is just a great thing. And so it's hearing these stories shared in that way, I think hits people in just a very deep and meaningful way.
Yeah. So following up from that, do you all think that audiobooks have an advantage over print books for moving conversations like this forward about the role of institutions perpetuating violence against women? Go with Erin again. Or shall we start with Alyssa?
Definitely.
Moving it around.
Oh no.
Go the opposite way around.
Advantage. I don't. I mean, I think they're very different. From I can only, my experience of reading a book is a very different experience from listening to a book. So I don't know. I don't know. I don't feel comfortable saying one is better than the other. They do different things. But I will say, since there does need to be, you know, a voice put to what we're talking about, it's a very powerful medium, and you know, maybe this is a particular time that it's even more useful.
Erin? Go on, Dea.
Oh, I was going to say, I mean, the original notion of the Me Too statement was by Tarana Burke, who I believe, if I'm not mistaken, came up with it as a way for one person to communicate to another. Yes, I understand you. I hear you. I've been there too. And hearing that is incredibly powerful. It can chemically change you, I think. But in terms of audiobooks, it occurs to me that the way I understand most people listen to audiobooks, like at the gym or on long car drives, and that gives you a space where you can hit pause, literally and figuratively, and say, hey, I'm thinking about this, and that starts the conversation. I know it's like the one thing that my husband and I are really grateful for is that when we're watching a really good drama, we can literally hit pause and say, oh my God, did that just happen? What did you think? And argue about it for a good 5 minutes before we go back into it. I think it creates both that moment of saying it, but then a discussion is sort of built into it, because it's like, oh, I can't believe they did that. Well, what did you expect they were going to do after X, Y, and Z? I'm like, I don't know, and I think that it sort of gives you that, it makes a space for you to have the conversation.
Yeah, I get that. Erin?
The thing that struck me when you asked the question was the relationship that I have with the story, it changes. So like, I think what's great, and I agree, definitely couldn't weight it in one direction or the other, because the subject matter is so fundamentally sensitive and so personal that if I'm reading a story, then I get to just have that relationship on my own. And that might be exactly what I need, that having responsibility, as I mentioned, to that voice, that person, that is feeling those feelings as they're sharing that story. Even though I know they're an actor, even though I know all those things, I still know they're a human being who has those feelings, might have even had those experiences. So I'm going to feel responsible to them. And for some people, that is exactly what they need. They need to be in a room, whether the room is in here or a room. They need to be in a room, a safe space, a room with somebody to feel with them. And some people need the first step or maybe the final step, or all the steps is going to be very personal and very specific to their own experience, and not feeling responsibility to anybody else for their trauma. So I think that both mediums are really important for when we look at how people come to an understanding of their trauma, recognize their trauma, and then learn to process and live with what that trauma has created in their life story. So I definitely think that both are very important, because then I get to choose. I get to choose how I'm in relationship with that story.
Yeah, that makes sense. Jason, what do you think?
I mean, I think reading a story is such a intimate, personal experience. It's even if you're reading as part of a book club or some larger group effort, it's still you read as an individual. The audiobook gives a chance for a story to be shared in a more communal environment, and that can truly matter. I wrote my story in this anthology based on my experience growing up in a very conservative church in the South, where I saw a lot of stuff that was quite wrong, and had a friend she bore the blunt. She got a lot of it, and she's sadly no longer here. And I remember that she wanted stories, like being able to watch stories, and she loved listening to radio and watching stuff on TV and film, and that was how she related to stories, because she could do it with other people, and that matters. It matters.
Community.
Sometimes that's what people need. So yeah, I think that's a great thing that the audiobook brings.
Right. Okay. So, how can speculative fiction audiobooks bring awareness to the major role that institutions play in enabling violence against women without seeming pedantic or preachy to listeners or readers? Do we start with Erin again?
How about Jason goes first this time?
Let's Jason go.
We go the other way around. Jason
It's too
goes
much.
first.
It's too much pressure.
No pressure. I would say that it's the honesty of the narrator's voice that matters in that case. If you have a narrator who is truly honestly just telling the story with their voice, I think that's what comes through. It comes through, and I think what you're talking about is rest with the narrators, which I'm not trying to bounce it back to y'all to answer the question. But that's how I truly feel. I think it's the power of the narrator in this instance. That's how you avoid the story seeming, coming off in that way.
Right. Dana, do you agree? What do you think?
Yeah, naturally. It's as I was mentioning before, it takes it and removes it, the immediacy of the trauma, of the experience, and puts it in a slightly different setting, a different cadence, a different voice. But it's as Jason was saying, it's the honesty of that, and it's when you're writing about something that is as big a topic as violence against women, it's going to be really easy to find a false note if you're not completely honest, if you don't go to all the hard places. If you try to avoid something, it's going to feel off. And so I think that that kind of storytelling is really can be very compelling, because like the more when writers talk about writing fiction, you tell just enough of the truth so you can get away with the one or two lies in here. But with something like this, you really need to bring all the emotional beats to it, and that's engaging, and it's sort of like the spoonful of sugar helps the medicine go down to a certain extent.
Okay. Alyssa?
Well, I was thinking, listening to Erin read Jason's story or that piece. There's also I feel like two things. There's great power in listening to someone be very emotionally in the moment and experiencing difficulty, whatever that might be, and then to have that same voice drop it and say she said, and then go on as if and control, and so that you're hearing um, an ability to control chaos through another voice. You're hearing a narrator live through something painful and then drop it and move on to the next moment of life. And I think I think that like the theater where I have done most of my work, but it's even more intense listening to somebody do that, and that can be I would think. I mean, for me, watching you, Erin, or listening to you, it's a great map of human behavior. Watching somebody be so exposed and vulnerable and in a dangerous place, and then able to control it and move on, or assess it and make some kind of organization about it, and then continue on to the next beat of life. And that I don't know, that could be useful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it's an interesting relationship for us to be in then, right? Again, it's like we're choosing to suspend our disbelief at a really high level. Like there's not all the seats in front of us in the theater and we're not seeing people on stage. It's not that kind of suspension of disbelief. It's the suspension of disbelief that a singular person is going to be all of the people in a story, and they're going to also be in a different world, like that this is fantasy, this is urban fantasy world, and or a sci-fi world, and that genre in and of itself, as you've both said, like or Dana specifically talking about how those worlds keep us just a little bit away from our reality of our actual world, which gives us a safety buffer. And it's almost like with Alyssa, you're saying in a way that I think, or at least what I thought when you were saying that, is it gives a little safety buffer of I can go with you emotionally. I can see that all these things exist within my world. It doesn't matter that an alien is being racist. Racism exists in my world. It doesn't matter that I'm in this story. I'm a monster, and that the preacher is a human, and that also has a differing or othering. We all get this. We're in relationship based in this suspension of disbelief, which gives us a buffer of safety to go there. So then I have to make sure that I am going to both those places, the safety place of the suspension of disbelief, like, hey, we're still in a story and I'm going to be him, and now I'm going to be her, but I'm going to be fully inside of her moment to moment reality. And I'm not going to reach toward you. I'm not going to tell you how to feel, because that's when I think the histrionics get in, is like when you're reaching toward your audience, and it as authors too. It's like you feel it in your writing when you're getting truly heavy handed, right? Is you're reaching too hard toward your audience, as opposed to trusting that if you go on the ride, that they're going to come with you, that you have to trust in your own humanity, and you have to trust in your own vulnerability, and you have to trust in your own heart and soul, that all of the things are in place for that suspension of disbelief to occur. And then the last piece is I have to live within my human vulnerability for us to truly be in a good relationship with one another. And in those genres, I think it's why these genres are so awesome. Yeah, well, Dana.
It's the same thing that you and Alyssa were talking about, Erin, in terms of being in the theater. I mean, that's a sacred space. That is a special, safe place to experience something that might be quite dramatic is one word. Could be quite traumatic is another word. But it's a place where you can go and say, okay, I'm going to hear this and I'm going to understand it and you're creating that same sort of space in an audiobook, I think.
Yes.
Yeah.
It might be shared with a couple of people. It might just be like your own private audience, your own private production, as it were. But it's that same kind of safe space, a sacred space.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Story really creates that. It's that around the campfire thing,
Yes.
It's that, whether it's written or spoken or acted out or however, it's just a very sacred human experience.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it is. Very true.
You all have put it so very nicely and so very clearly, I think. All right, so which brings us really nicely to my next question, because we're going to get down to the nuts and bolts of storytelling for audiobook narrators who, in the course of their work, may encounter stories about violence against women and that they are tasked at reading. So this is specifically for Alyssa and Erin. From your perspectives as audiobook narrators, what are the particular challenges of narrating stories that feature violence against women? Let's go with Alyssa and then we go to Erin.
Well, I guess what we were just saying too. You said something about heavy-handedness, Erin, and I think that goes for narrating to always have a third eye, and less is more, and the words speak. It's the writing that we're here to portray, not we are the vehicle of that for the words, and so to have as little of my own emotions or my own take on something. It's really to listen as closely as possible to the intent of the author, but gently, because you don't want to lose the ear.
Yeah.
So to always be inviting, even if it's difficult, to always be listenable, even if it's painful.
Yeah, it's an intimate space. The Alyssa and I both have theater lives, and that's a bigger space and a bigger community to be involved with. And I think the listening space, it's just me and one other person, and I'm in a little padded box by myself, and that person's actually there with me. So that's the relationship that I have. It's one-to-one. I'm not playing to a community. I'm right there, right, just me and one other person sitting at that campfire or sitting at that cafe. And that's, there's different personalities in every character every book that's written. Whether that person is more animated or less animated is very much comes out in the writing and is in the way that people are portrayed. And so, like in this piece in particular, and I think with the kind of genre work that's in this anthology, there's a sense of people that are holding themselves tightly because of what they've been through, so that also the way that who are they free with and who are they not free with becomes very important to how they're even holding themselves. And for people who have had traumas to their bodies, the holding of the body is one of the things that's spoken of a lot, as well as holding the space. I'm trying not to take up a lot of space, because space means I get seen, and then that thing might happen again. And so there's a lot of that happens in this particular trauma community, is the bigness of that space. So I think when dealing with this particular work, it's important. It's like what we do all the time when we read a script of any sort, is we're looking at, what body is this body for this story, and how much space is it taking up. And in audiobooks, it's usually like you're telling it just to somebody right there in that small space with you. So it's an intimate storytelling. It's an intimate sharing. And exactly what you're saying, I think it's that trust that you don't have to reach.
Yeah. So, which brings me very nicely to my next question, which is, do you two have any tips for audiobook narrators who are faced with narrating stories about violence against women? I mean, actually, what you said, Erin, is very insightful. But any other tips that you have for narrating stories about violence against women, for anyone who's unsure how to approach the story appropriately?
I think listen to the text. Is read the book. Really let it, like, truly, I know that seems silly, but because it is a fundamental industry standard that we read the books before we narrate them, but it is all there. Trusting that the size of that person and how they embody their body and how they are in the world is going to come out in the writing. It's in the writing. It's how it is. Like, and it was nice to have that difference actually in the point of views between the two stories. So having that more omniscient point of view, and maybe it has some third person limited as well, within moments within, and then this being first person, to have that difference in point of view, that alone fundamentally shifts the way in which you approach the work. And I think it's just, tread lightly, be honest, and go to the text.
Alyssa?
Same.
Yeah.
Ditto.
It seems to me, listening to the two of you, that to be a really good and effective audiobook narrator, you need to really understand human character and the way people behave. Do you guys study? Do you two study people? Like, were you going to say something, Alyssa? Yeah.
I mean, I don't know. I think now there's people come from it's all different kinds of people are coming and narrating books. So it's very different heads are coming, and as we've said, we have theater background, so it was just kind of a footbridge over to this world of narration. And yes, certainly it is the study of human nature.
Yeah. I'm a big people watcher, and I don't think I'll ever be done. It's amazing to me that I can spend, like, literally dedicate my entire life to story and and I'm still fascinated at how unbelievably diverse we are in every single possible way. And I don't think I'll ever stop learning that.
Hold on. Okay, so we're almost at the end, so I'm actually going to ask my last few questions, which is about storytelling. So storytelling via different formats and channels is a major tool used by women's rights defenders to help push for cultural change. In some ways, today's audiobooks can be said to be oral storytelling for the digital age, which is what we've been talking about, actually. The difference is that instead of telling stories to a small group of listeners around the campfire, for example, who are physically in front of you, audiobook narrators bring stories from print to life through their voices to produce recordings for a global audience. So, Alyssa and Erin again, how can today's audiobook narrators, some of whom have huge fan bases, help advance efforts to address and end violence against women? Let's go with Alyssa first.
Read good books.
Yeah.
If you're at the top of the game, you have choices on what you read. And you have, if writers are coming to you to say, please read my book, you have choices. And then you have a responsibility to choose good ones.
Yeah. That's
Yeah.
great. That's just great advice for anybody who's doing any sort of job, and especially this one. Yeah. Yeah. And I think some narrators have platforms, so have social media platforms across all of the socials. Some don't, and it doesn't, like, that's a personal choice, a personal business choice. And I think that if somebody does have a platform, then it's a great opportunity to, and even doing things like this, like, you know, the reason why you've been able to have so many of the narrators come on is because this is very, very important to us. And when we actually get to voice story and be part of compilations or part of stories, exactly like Alyssa was saying, that means that really fundamentally are pushing the conversation forward, or eliciting conversation at all, or helping communities feel normalized, feel that they're part of a community at all. Anything that really is, I mean, I think story as a whole elicits a building of empathy and compassion in our world. So I do actually think it's activism in and of itself. But I think that anything you can do to be part of that. So if that activism is just doing your job and being a narrator, then that's what you do, because story builds compassion and empathy in it. Then if you've got a platform, great, use that platform to help highlight people, even if it's not a book you've done. Like, just be in community with authors, be in community with writers of articles, be in community with editors, people who are broadening the conversation. You can choose to, on your platform, to ally with all sorts of people, and you get to choose this community, that social media community, as much as you choose, you know, your best friends, and, you know, I would even say your family, to a certain extent, who you are in community with, you choose. So I think that.
That's very well said. Okay, this is a question for everybody. Do you have any suggestions about how anti-violence against women activists and organizations can use speculative fiction audiobooks to support or be part of the advocacy and activism for women and girls? Let's mix things up and go to Dana first.
Oh gosh.
No pressure.
Yeah,
No
no
pressure.
It's a tough one, because I think that if the book is, the printed book is out there and it's speaking to people, then finding a way to get that made into an audiobook is sort of the next logical step. I admit I don't listen to a lot of audiobooks, but it's I know that our narrators were talking about the fact that there are communities that build up around them, and so having that opportunity to speak to that community and choosing the projects that you do is going to help you speak to that community about these things. I think that's as good as I can get with that, because I wouldn't presume to tell the narrators how to do their job, except, you know, keep reading the good books, as that you both were saying. Keep reading, keep looking for things that speak to you and you think would speak to others as well.
Jason?
Well, I mean, I would emphasize the power of stories to slip past people's defenses and walls,
Yep.
to be able to reach them when they have their defenses up, and they, you know, and these stories might even be able to reach people who don't think that violence against women is an issue. You know, there's been studies about how fiction is one of the most powerful ways to change someone's worldview. You know, reading a story, it helps them get into someone else's mind, get into someone else's life that other storytelling mediums, you know, daily, the news, Twitter, you name it, can't do. So yeah, I would emphasize that, you know, and the great thing about genre stories is that also then you have you're coming at it from a totally different angle, and so you can also get past those walls that people put up. So I'd emphasize that.
Yeah. I think accessibility too, you know, there's a lot of people who reading is not a possibility for them because of all sorts of neurodiversity. And if you've got neurodiversity and you've got trauma, then how else are you supposed to get this story? How else are you supposed to feel normalized, feel part of community, feel understood? And for those who haven't, who've some made it through without those traumas, how are they going to identify or have empathy for or compassion for people who have been through these things? How are they going to maybe recognize themselves as a perpetrator as opposed to a victim, right? As well, like, it's really important I think, to make sure that we're always having an accessibility conversation. And we know that audiobook consumption fundamentally helps people who, and it actually lights up the same part of the brain. So reading is about comprehension. It's not about deciphering symbols on a page. And people have trouble deciphering symbols on a page, no matter how those symbols are what they look like. So having the opportunity to still be in that comprehension space and still in that story receival space is so important. And I do think it's why the audiobook industry has grown at 20 to 40% every year for the past 10 years. There's a reason why we're consuming audio content at a very high level. And I think part of it is the recognition of neural diversity. It's not just that our lives have gotten too busy. It's not just that we can't sit down. It's actually that a lot of people could never sit down and read a book.
Yeah.
They could never receive story in that way.
Yeah.
So I think that accessibility is a huge part of that, and so important when looking at stories that deal with trauma.
Good. Alyssa.
I don't know why this occurs to me. I have a 12-year-old daughter, and I was always struck when I started reading audiobooks many years ago, that young adult books that was a genre that I don't really think it existed in the same way when I was, young. It didn't. And so when I started reading young adult books, I was really struck at how well they were written, and how they were written, for lack of a better, with a purpose to acknowledge young people's intelligence and kind of grasping of adult worlds, and telling stories for them, writing books for them, but with a real respect for their age and what they were capable of. And so I guess adding to what everybody has said, I especially because of my raising a kid, just how important it is to use books and reading and stories before the problem happens, so that there's awareness, so that we catch it. We there's an understanding of the potential of things, or what has of history, of what has come before, so that they walk into adults with confidence.
Yeah.
I know that was choppy, but that's
No.
Yeah.
We understood you. I think we understood you very clearly.
Yeah.
All right. Okay, so final question for everybody. What speculative fiction audiobooks would you recommend to audiobook fans who are looking for stories where the narrator handles violence against women well?
I think giving the devil his due is really
I've heard it's so
mind.
good.
So good. Yeah, you're so right. And the narrations are so amazing. Anything else?
I've worked, and it's not me plugging myself because I don't care if you listen to it or you read it, but I've actually worked on a urban fantasy romance series for about 8 years. And one of the things that I actually think is so fantastic about it is it deals with early childhood trauma and violence, and it really severe levels of it. And the story fundamentally catching up with this person when she's in her mid-20s is about her learning how to trust and be in community and have any sort of relationship in her life again. And that's what the series is actually about. Like, you can put all the labels and monikers, it's an urban fantasy romance, you know, you can paranormal, blah. You can say whatever you want to say as far as the genre that it's part of, which again gives us a safety net, gives us this little bit of distance and yet enough familiarity to deal with those. But it is a series that's about trauma recovery, really, and as much as recovery is part of like learning how to live with. And so it's called the Alice Worth series by Lisa Edmonds. And that's what I think is so special about it. And it's why it's one of my all-time favorite things to work on, because it deals so beautifully. Her whole community understands what she has been through. And some of them also, most of them have gone through different types of violent trauma as well. And so it's everybody learning.
Okay, we'll check that one out. Alyssa.
You've recorded so many books.
Well, I mean, it's awful to say, but, you know, literature is filled with violence against women.
Yep.
I mean, it's everywhere. And, you know, and even if they're in long skirts and or Edwardian, whatever, it is throughout. So I don't have a particular title that I can call to mind, but they're not hard to find.
No.
And many of the now, with our present day mind, it's interesting looking back at like you know, books from
the 80s, the 90s.
Yes, and you realize that all of the language is concocted in a way and sculpted, but if it was written now, it would be a lot more clear about what exactly was happening. And so it's been around.
Yeah. Jason, suggestions, recommendations?
Yes, an audiobook I'd recommend, although I'd also recommend read the written version, is The Four Profound Weaves by R.B. Lindbergh. It's a novella that really gives you the hope of how you can move past the trauma and people can build the relationships and a new world after they've gone through all that. And it's so beautiful how you know, just how it all works. So I highly recommend that. The Four Profound Weaves by R.B. Lindbergh.
Okay. And Dana, any other suggestion besides giving the devil his due?
I'm sorry, I was bailing out with that one, I'm afraid.
It's okay.
Well done. Well done.
I mean, we have 16 stories in there, so it's okay.
Well, that's the thing about anthologies. I think it's a great gateway drug. It's that's how I got into science fiction when I was growing up. I got you get a collection. You say, oh, I like that. So what else has that person written? So I'm not being entirely snarky or weaving that question. A little bit.
It's okay. So y'all go and read The Giving the Devil His Due, and listen to the audiobooks, because as you heard, you just heard Alyssa and Erin only, but we have 14 other amazing narrators, or 13 other. Yeah. All right. So that was actually our very last question. I want to thank all of you for being with us today and for giving us your perspectives and insights. It's a really good discussion. We had a good discussion going in the chat box as well. All right. So before we wrap up, I'm just going to give a quick reminder to all of you interested in getting your very own copy of Giving the Devil His Due. You can order the audiobook and the ebook or the paperback edition from major booksellers worldwide. There's Amazon, Kobo, Google Play, Apple, and more. All net proceeds go to the Pixel Project's campaigns, programs, and initiatives such as this one to keep all our work going. And besides that, we have also teamed up with 12 of the 16 authors who contributed stories, including Jason and Dana, to offer a special anthology bookplate for buyers. Each author will sign 16 bookplates, and it will be on a first-come, first-served basis. Each book plate includes resources for domestic violence and sexual assault victims and survivors in 205 countries. And if you want to find out more about violence against women, about the work that the Pixel Project does, or what you can do about it, we have lots and lots of resources on our website, www.thepixelproject.net. I'm going to share a slide. Sorry. This takes a little bit of time to set up. Okay, here we go. Can you all see this? Okay, here we go.
Yes.
All right, so yeah, so you can go and get Giving the Devil His Due from Audible, Apple, Google Play, Spotify, Kobo, Chirp, and so many other major audiobook retailers worldwide. And we also have a page on our website. Go to the Pixel Project and look for Giving the Devil His Due audiobook page. Regina is putting the links in the chat box, so you can just go and click on that. And yeah, so if you want the ebook or the print book, you can go to Amazon, Kobo, Google Play, Book Depository, and many other major sellers worldwide. And Regina will also put this link in the chat box for you guys. All right. That brings us to the end. I think actually before we say good night or goodbye, Dana has an announcement.
Oh yeah, I am thrilled to say that my espionage thriller, Exit Interview, will come out on December 6th. It is my and I'm going to say a very feminist take on the thriller, because I love reading thrillers, but I really wanted to see a woman blowing some stuff up. So I had,
Yay.
so that's December 6th, Exit Interview, and it's a reporter and a covert operative who have to work together to solve the murder of an arms dealer. So,
Nice.
a lot of fun.
Sounds very exciting. December 6th, you said.
December 6th. Yep.
Okay.
Pre-order now.
All right. And I just want to put a comment up that someone left. This is from Missy36 Honesty. Missy says, remember everybody, the movie She Said is now in theaters. And so She Said is about the two journalists, Jodie Cantor and Megan Tooley, who broke the story about Harvey Weinstein. So go and watch that.
Yeah.
Go and read Dana's book. Go and watch She Said. All right. So all that's left is to say thank you again to our amazing panel, and good night, good morning, good evening, wherever you are in the world, and goodbye.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Thanks everyone.
You.
Thanks for doing this.